I whispered against his wet collar. Yes. Why? He asked. My queen willed it so. That was true as far as it went, but it kept me from sharing secrets that Queen Andeas wouldn't want shared. Tyrannus might survive her wrath. I wouldn't. Biggs turned back to the opposing side. We're not conceding that this alleged celibacy took place, but if it did, the men in question are no longer celibate. They are with the princess now, and not the queen. The princess has stated that the three of them are her lovers. There would be no alleged celibacy induced. Biggs seemed to search for the right word. Madness. He made light of it with his voice, his face, and a hand gesture. It was a glimpse of what he'd be like in court. He just might be worth all my money my aunt was paying. Shelby said, the king's statement, the charges filed, are enough to allow the United States government to confine all the princess's guard to the lands of Faerie. I know the laws you're referring to. Many in Jefferson's government didn't agree with him allowing the Fae to settle here after they were exiled from Europe. They insist on a law that would allow them to confine any citizen of Faerie deemed too dangerous to be allowed among the human citizenry, to be permanently confined to Faerie. It is a very broad law and has never been invoked. It's never been needed before, Cortez said. Dole stayed at my back, his hand resting on my shoulder. Either he knew I needed comforting or he needed it. I laid my hand on top of his so we could touch bare skin to bare skin. He was so warm, so solid. Just the touch made me feel more certain that it would be all right. We would be all right. It's not needed now. You all know it, Biggs said. He hissed at them. Tried to scare the princess by threatening to send all her guards back to Faerie. Shame on you. The princess doesn't look scared, Pamela Nelson said. I gave her the full weight of my tricolored eyes, and she couldn't hold my gaze. Why was she having more trouble around us than the rest, even with her jacket turned around? You are threatening to take the men I love away from me. Shouldn't that frighten me? It should, she said, but it doesn't seem to. Farmer touched my arm, a clear, let-me-talk gesture. I leaned back into the weight of Dole at my back and let the lawyers talk. Which brings us to the long question. The royals of any court are exempt from the law Mr. Shelby has raised. We're not proposing to exile Princess Meredith back to Faerie, Shelby said. You know the threat to put all her guards under some sort of legal confinement to Faerie is outrageous? Shelby nodded. Fine, then just 3 that are charged with rape. Mr. Cortez and I are both duly appointed officers of the United States Attorney's Office. We are within our duty and rights to simply put the 3 guards back into the land of Faerie until these charges are settled. I repeat, the laws written cannot be applied to the rules of any court of Faerie, Farmer said. And I repeat that we aren't threatening to do anything to Princess Meredith. But we aren't referring to that royal, Farmer said. Shelby looked down the line of lawyers on his side. I'm not sure we're following your argument. Princess Meredith's guard are royal for now. What does that mean for now? Cortez asked. It means that when inside the silly court, they have a throne on the royal dais in which they take turns sitting beside the princess. They are her royal consorts. Being her lover doesn't make them royal, Cortez said. Prince Philip is technically still Queen Elizabeth's royal consort, but they're married, Cortez said. But in Faerie, at any court, you aren't allowed to marry until you're with child, Farmer said. Mr. Farmer, I said, touching his arm, since this is informal, perhaps it would go more quickly, I explained. Farmer and Biggs whispered back and forth, but finally I got the nod. I was going to be allowed to talk. Oh, goody. I smiled at the other side of the table, leaning a little forward, hands nicely folded on the table. My guards are my lovers, which makes them royal consorts until one of them makes me pregnant. Then that one will be king to my queen. Until the choice is made, they are all royalty in the unsealed court. The 3 guards that have been charged by the king should be sent back to Faerie, Shelby said. King Tyrannus was so afraid that Ambassador Stevens would see that the unsealed court was beautiful that he put a spell on the man, a spell that forced him to see us as monstrous. A man who would do such a desperate thing would do many other desperate things. What do you mean, princess? To lie is to be cast out of Faerie, but to be king is sometimes to be above the law. Are you saying these charges are falsified? Cortez asked. Of course they are false. You would say anything to save your lover, Shelby said. I am she, and I am not above the law. I cannot lie. Is that true? Shelby leaned down and asked Fiducci. He nodded. It's supposed to be true, but either the princess is lying or Lady Katrine is lying. Shelby looked back at me. You cannot lie. I have the ability, but to do so is to run the risk of being cast out of Faerie. I squeezed Dole's hand tight. I just got back. I don't want to lose it all again. Why did you leave Faerie the first time, Princess? Biggs answered that. That question is off limits and outside the charges in question. The Queen had probably given him a list of questions I couldn't answer. Shelby smiled. Very well. Is it true that the Raven Guards were forced into centuries of celibacy? May I ask a question before I answer that? You can ask anything you like, Princess, but I want my answer. And I may not answer your question. I smiled at him, and he smiled back. Dole's hand tightened on my shoulder. He was right. Mustn't flirt until we knew exactly how it would be perceived. I toned the smile down and asked my question. Did King Tyrannus himself say that the ravens were forced in centuries of celibacy? I've so stated, Shelby said. No, I mean his truth, Mr. Shelby. Please, bear in mind that even a princess may be tortured for going against her queen's orders. You admit that they torture people at the unsilly court, Cortez said. They torture people at both courts, Mr. Cortez. Queen Andeas just doesn't hide what she does because she's not ashamed of it. Are you stating for the record, Cortez says? This will be a sealed record, Biggs said, unless it goes to court. Yes, Cortez said. But are you stating for the record that King Tyrannus allows torture to be used as a punishment in the sealed court? Answer my question truthfully, and I will answer yours. Cortez looked at Shelby. They exchanged a longer than normal look. Then both of them turned back to me. Yes, they said at the same time. The 2 men looked at each other, and finally Cortez nodded at Shelby, who said, yes. King Terentus stated that the fact that the Raven Guard had enforced no centuries of celibacy was the reason they were a danger to women. He further stated that to then have to force celibacy lifted for only one little girl, referring to you, Princess, was monstrous, for no woman could satisfy the lusts of centuries. So the celibacy was the motive for the rape, I said. That seems to be the king's reasoning, Shelby said. We haven't looked for a motive beyond the usual for rape. The usual, I thought. I've answered your question, Princess. Now are you stating for the record that the Sealy Court tortures its prisoners? Frost came to stand beside Dole. Meredith, think upon this before you answer. I looked behind me, met his worried eyes, the soft gray of winter skies. I held my other hand out to him, and he took it. Tyrannus let our cat out of the bag, Frost. It's only fair we let one of his out. Frost frowned at me. I do not understand this talk of cats, but I fear at his anger. I had to smile at him, even as I agreed with him. He began this, Frost. I will only finish it. He squeezed my hand, and Dole squeezed the other, so that my hands were crisscrossed over my chest, holding them. I held their hands while I said, Mr. Shelby, Mr. Cortez, you asked me, am I stating for the record that King Terence's Golden Court tortures as a punishment? I am so stating. The record was supposed to be sealed, but if either of these secrets got to the press, this little family feud was going to get very ugly very fast. How are we doing on time? Chapter 2? The lawyers decided that Dole and Frost could answer some general questions about what it was like being part of my personal guard, to give some background to the atmosphere that Reese, Galen, and A-Block had been living in. I wasn't sure it was going to be helpful, but I wasn't a lawyer, so who was I to argue? Dole sat on my right, Frost on my left. My lawyers, Farmer and Biggs, moved a few seats down to give them room. Shelby got the first question. And there are now 16 of you with access only to Princess Meredith for your own needs. If you mean for sex, then yes, Dole said. Shelby coughed and nodded. Yes, I do mean sex. Then say what you mean, Dole said. I will do that. Shelby sat up a little straighter. I imagine it must be difficult to share the princess. I'm not certain I understand the question. Well, not to be indelicate, but waiting for your turn must be hard after so many years of denial. No, it is not hard to wait. But of course it is, Shelby said. You're putting words in the witness's mouth, Biggs said. Sorry, what I mean, Captain Dole, is that after so many years of needs unmet, it must be difficult only to have sex about every 2 weeks or so. Ross laughed and caught himself and tried to Dole smiled. It was the first truly broad smile that he'd had since the question started. The white flash of his teeth and all that dark, dark face was startling if you weren't used to it. It was like having a statue suddenly smile at you. I failed to see the humor in being forced to wait weeks for sex, Captain Dole, Lieutenant Frost. I would see no humor in that either, Dole said. But when the number of men grew larger, Princess Meredith changed some of the parameters for us all. I'm not following, Cameron Nelson said. Parameters? Dole looked at me. Perhaps you better explain, Princess.